everybody, and welcome back to You Can't Win. This is Tom here, and I'm joined by Don as usual. Today, we're going to be talking about the Great Reset. So this is something that has been kind of a conspiracy theory, and not so much a conspiracy theory, but just like a thing that is a reality, I guess. The Davos Economic Forum kind of had this plan to build the world economy back up after COVID and whatever recession we are experiencing and may continue to experience. And it looked like the basic idea was that we would start eliminating ownership of things at a small scale, and it would start to move more towards like renting services, all that kind of stuff. So you wouldn't own a car, you wouldn't own just anything. You'd be just buying it on a per use basis or some kind of subscription. And a lot of people are feeling like this is some kind of Marxist plot. There's a lot of lore around this conspiracy, which I don't know like all the ins and outs of it, but that's the basic gist of it, I think.
Yeah, so I guess like the basic idea is the build back better kind of stuff, where it's like,
right.
It's basically this idea that they've had long-standing problems with the way that the economies have been arranged for like sustainability and stuff. So the idea is, well, now that we have a chance to fix a lot of that and kind of tidy things up, what we can do is get rid of a lot of debt that people hold, but at the same time wipe out maybe, you know, in the more conspiracy side, it's like wipe out a lot of the assets that average people hold and stuff. And yeah, and then maybe have in exchange for that, maybe like something like a basic income or ongoing kind of thing. And it's basically this fear that you're being turned into like a serf kind of, right? Like you just, you maybe have some minimal stake in the system where you can kind of get by, but otherwise you're just providing labor in exchange for a few streaming services of like approved content and all this kind of stuff. And it's one of those things where it's probably a lot more, it's of the conspiracy theories, it's one of those things where it seems to have more grounding in sort of the way people feel things are going, you know? It's not necessarily like true in what they actually aim for, but it seems sort of like that. And so the conservatives in Canada have actually really been playing into this a lot. One person posted a petition and it got like a huge number of signatures, I think, being like, we need to stop the Great Reset and all this kind of stuff. So, you know, it has that sort of feel of, you know, they're coming for our stuff or something. But, you know, I don't know. I think that there is something there, obviously, that there is this sort of shock doctrine kind of thing that Naomi Klein talks about, of using the crisis as an opportunity for policy reforms that people have been wanting for a long time.
Yeah,
and,
you know what's funny, mentioning Naomi Klein, the places where I have heard people talk about this from that conspiratorial perspective, you know, like that kind of right wing, like, oh, this is a Marxist dictatorship plot kind of a idea, they are referencing Naomi Klein. That has been kind of incorporated into the kind of canon of paranoid conspiracy texts at this point, which is interesting because it's fairly left wing, if I remember it right. I read it like 15 years ago, but you know, she's a leftist of some bent, and it's interesting to see they're starting to read that stuff.
Yeah, I think that she kind of is good at anticipating a lot of the trends that are going to come up in different ways, and obviously she thinks that it's opportunistically used for right-wing purposes most of the time, but she does have a sense of urgency around stuff like climate change and sort of major social reforms she's been trying to push in Canada and the United States. So yeah, it is like there is that feeling out there, at least I think amongst progressive minded elites kind of thing, that there should be some major push on things like climate change and other things that somehow change the structure of the economy. But of course, in the elite sort of minded sphere, I think that a lot of it is built up with tech guru kind of nonsense kind of thing, right? So it really is about like, okay, well, we're going to have these giant institutions, but we have to kind of adapt to them and sort of lean on the tech sector to develop a lot of it. So there has been stuff like we had talked a little bit about before this. We started about like different taxes and stuff that are being put on these streaming services or services of other kinds. And it's interesting because it's shown to be, it's kind of aimed at being like a countervailing force. Like somehow the government is mitigating the effects of these tech giants, but in some ways it almost feels like they're getting addicted to it too. Like in Canada, like they put like I'm not sure if they even put the tax on yet, but they have different like agreements with Netflix, so that like Netflix will make a lot of the stuff of or like make Canadian content, make like Canadian like or make things in Canada and stuff. And that seems kind of like an odd like accommodation or something, you know? Like you've got this whole overarching system where I don't know, it reminds me of like Airbnb giving units for people in the crisis, like in different situations, like they're somehow trying to become like a social housing unit kind of thing, or like Uber and all those things becoming like public taxis in places and stuff. I don't know. It's this weird like hybrid neoliberal public-private partnership kind of thing, you know? So, you know.
Yeah. The thing about all that kind of progressive technocratic mindset is it always feels like they're trying to have it both ways.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to say like, oh, well, the people need our help. We need to do stuff that's going to help out the working man or whatever. And then they also want to try to promote this like tech bullshit. And then it ends up kind of being the worst of both worlds,
sure.
You know, somehow. Like it just always ends up that way. Maybe not even with ill intent. It just kind of tends to go that way.
Yeah, I think that the computers are a really good example of this that I've been thinking about more recently, about how, you know, you had all these people warning 20, 30 years ago that we were moving towards this model where instead of just buying a computer and then having like, say, open source programs, whatever, so that your main sort of contribution was the capital of buying like the pieces or whatever, right? Now there are multiple streams of payments you're supposed to be making just to make it work with modern contemporary technology for different services, especially if you're like a business or, you know, even just a person that like me, I'm kind of like in an in-between kind of thing where I'm technically like self-employed. So there's a bunch of little things that I find very useful. So I do get a benefit from it, but it's also like you're paying like 10 different subscriptions or something at the end of the day, you know? And instead of just say, I pay Google to host my email and stuff like that, right? And little things like that add up. It's not just that it's I'm paying these things. It's also that like it's all on the cloud kind of thing, you know? Like it's all services that they not only control, but they also basically just read and advertise towards too. So,
the cloud is a great early example of this because this means you don't have to own your own storage. You are using whoever, Amazon or whoever was on, I don't know what the early stages of the cloud ownership look like, but now it's pretty much Amazon owns like most of the internet. And they have the hardware, they have all the like actual stuff that does the job of storing it for you, and you are just attached to them. And it doesn't really cost that much for most people. If anything at all. Like I don't pay anything to Google for that, but you know, they're data harvesting and stuff, so it is profitable for them to do this, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, if you're looking at it from the perspective of society overall, that there is obviously enormous costs involved. Even advertising itself is a cost to you, right, in different ways, right? In terms of, you know, it's designed to increase the chance that you'll buy something and stuff like that, you know, so this idea that it's like a matchmaking service is not necessarily all that reasonable. If it, you know, it's like, I don't know. It's just, there's huge parts of the infrastructure that I'm not even sure how you would make it public or how you would regulate it in a better way. I don't know. It's just like there's ongoing things where you can kind of look at choices that were made in the past that it's hard to sort of divorce yourself from. Like, you know, it's technically possible that I could just set up my own email servers and I could do all the back end kind of work, you know, instead of using different office programs, I could use the open office suites and all that kind of stuff, you know, like there's ways to do it. It's just that it doesn't really matter that much at the end of the day because it's just irritating thing that you can do for yourself, or you can just do what everyone else is doing that is a bit annoying and expensive or something like that kind of thing, you know, like it's not, the individual choice is not really what matters here as much as it's like deciding who you're going to vote for or something like that. It's like, you know, it's not the individual action that is the important thing. It's the overall sort of shape of how the technology is moving kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, right. Because even if you are able to find ways to kind of maintain, you know, whatever things you want in your own hands, you can kind of hold on to that. That's probably going to be possible. But the thing is, the costs of all this stuff is going to change as things start to become more focused and centered on this like rented kind of economy. then to actually own something, it's going to be much more costly, I think.
Well, one thing that you can kind of see that happening with is like DVDs and stuff like that, or like content like that way, where I had bad internet for a few years. So what was happening is I would buy DVDs from like Walmart or something. You know, the thing is that with that is that there's the cost is not really comparable in a lot of ways, right? Because for Netflix plus Prime or something like that is about $25 Canadian or something a month, if for like the good HD whatever. That's like one DVD now, you know. So it's like you're, you know, like it's a monopoly price that is actually beneficial to you, but it's also like it has these costs where if you're buying something outside of the subscription model, then you start paying these really high prices really quickly, kind of thing, just to maintain. If you're doing it legally, obviously, like, you know, you could just torrent or whatever, but that's part of the issue with content that falls out of favor or something like that, right? So like that's one of the issues with the cloud model is that things can just get zapped off the internet, like so easily. And if you're sort of playing by the rules, which I tend to do, I haven't really used torrents and stuff in a few years just because of the way my internet's set up and that. And if, you know, Louis C.K. or something like that is falls out of favor for what he did, and then they pull down the videos or something like that, you know, like you can't, I don't know, it's strange. Or like, you know, Adult Swim, I guess, with Sam Hyde's show and stuff, they pulled it, I think. I don't know, I feel like there is something a bit ominous with that, with all the stuff where they're editing videos so that they have different, they look different for, you know, like I said, I think that there was a big controversy that we're going to edit out Donald Trump from Home Alone 2 or something. And, you know, stuff like that, like it adds up, you know, it adds up as like a phenomenon. All the little things is like, I don't know. That's why I always would joke about like they should, like Stan Lee got accused of abusing someone or whatever, right? It was just like him being like super old or whatever, right? Like it was like him grabbing at nurses or something like that, I think. But I was saying that like they should pull down all the Marvel content in that.
Right, yeah.
And it's stuff like that where it's like you can kind of sense from in the ideology what is something that someone becomes fair game and what is, oh no, real money is involved in that. We're not doing that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's weird the focus on like stand-ups and comedy and stuff that kind of took. And I don't know, you can go listen to pick any random comedian's podcast and they'll be talking about this for half the episode, so I won't go into it too deeply. But yeah, it just seems like Louis didn't do a whole lot and then got extremely punished, and then like Stan Lee, it probably is similar magnitude of a crime and no discussion whatsoever. For whatever reason, like stand-up comedy seemed to kind of be seen as more, I don't want to say like threatening. I don't know if it's that. It's more like they wanted to make room for other kinds of content, like to change comedy in some sort of way. I wonder if that has something to do with like Daily Show evolving into almost like MSNBC, basically. Like it kind of moved away from being like this kind of very satirical kind of thing, and now it's like SNL and Daily Show are both just like super libbed up, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't know, that stuff doesn't concern me too much because, for example, like a lot of these comedians who are getting canceled or they're feeling the pressure of that, they're just moving to YouTube and other sorts of platforms and they're doing just fine. Like Mark Normand, he was, you know, he doesn't really watch his mouth. He's not a bad dude or whatever. He doesn't like have bad politics or anything like that. I think he could easily kind of work the whole mainstream thing, but he just decides not to. And he did really good with his YouTube, and now he's like opening for Jerry Seinfeld and stuff. So I don't know. It's a weird thing. I'm not really sure what the plan is there. It might just be the people that run this stuff have certain sensibilities and they're just interested in that thing. I don't see it as some kind of diabolical plot so much, you know? Sure. But it is, you're right that it is like kind of worrisome, the idea that things just start to get consolidated in their hands and you have much less of an ability to control that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to, I think it also works basically like rebuilding the cable system. People kind of point that out, that you're paying that you're sort of dependent on them for paying $50 a month or more sometimes for all these packages combined or something. But like the real point there, I think, is less the cost is part of it, but it's also like they are now content makers that determine the culture in a lot of ways, like Disney can basically, with things like social media and stuff like that, they're recreating that sense of everyone watching the same thing. It's not necessarily true. I mean, numbers might not bear it out. It's more kind of like that there's this subculture of people that have very, very similar content preferences, and that it kind of strings people along that way. And that really does rebuild a sense of mainstream and acceptability and tolerance and stuff that I think it sets the pace for a lot of other things. It makes it very hard, I think, to buck that trend unless you're just willing to be a small part of it, kind of thing, So
yeah. Even if you personally don't watch that stuff, enough other people are, it starts to kind of become that, like, it occupies such a large part of the discourse that the stuff you are watching, if it's not necessarily that kind of like mainstream stuff, they're going to be responding to it. It really like warps things around it. So there is there is that sense of like a mass influence that kind of thing has. Even if you avoid it, it still affects you. I don't know. The big tragedy of all this kind of stuff more than anything is the loss of the alternative. Like if we think to, go back 10, 15 years or something, you mentioned torrenting and, the music industry responded to Napster essentially with Spotify. Like we kind of see they co-opted that whole issue. Like we could have gone in a direction where all this stuff ended up being free and you are able to just access it whenever you want to, without any restrictions. And they've managed to find ways to kind of rein that in and really like channel everybody through one thing. And it didn't even end up being like multiple different services, some kind of patchwork thing. It's really been consolidated. Like it's Spotify's the big one. Pandora, like, does anyone use Pandora anymore? Like I think it's all been monopolized.
Yeah, and Apple Music too, I think, and maybe a few things like there've been attempts to kind of compete with it, like with Prime Music and stuff. But it is interesting how most of them are basically within the tent of some other giant content provider, like Apple. Yeah,
it's competing ecosystems, right? Sure. Like there's the Google one, there's the Apple one. Amazon is trying to do something. Sure. Microsoft always has its finger in every pie. They're trying to do that too. And then there's like the more focused independent ones like Spotify that I mentioned. Twitter is sort of like a similar thing in the social media space. At some point, they're all going to be one thing. It's all going to be one ecosystem. Right now, we're kind of seeing the jockeying for power, but I think that seems inevitable the way things are going. And that sets it up perfectly for this, like, everything is a service, everything is rented, you don't own anything kind of economy. And, for people like us, we don't own anything anyways. So that, the direct consequences of like, you don't own a car, you just Uber everywhere, or, you don't own a home, you're just going to rent for the rest of your life. That's pretty much like, okay, well, that was my life. So that's not as shocking, but it's the fact that this is becoming the norm and everyone is doing this, that affects me, even if I'm not experiencing direct consequences of some kind of policy shift or something.
Yeah. I do think that there's still that layer of people that's pretty small, but it still exists, that they don't experience it that way because their assets have gone up and up and up, kind of thing, right? So there are like a good number of well-off families and things like that they have bought into, real estate, and they have bought into all these different things that they see it as it's easier to get rich now than ever before, kind of thing. That's the kind of sense I think a lot of people have. And that because of that, those are the people that the industries tend to focus on. Like we're warping more and more of the, say, news content and all these different things around either like well-off boomers who just watch TV, 50 hours a week plus, or like middle class, like upper middle class kind of professionals who watch MSNBC and all that kind of stuff. Like those are the people that everything now is basically targeted towards for content, and like young people in those kind of pools, kind of thing. And it's interesting how that is. It's not just the culture in terms of like media consumption and stuff, even though that's maybe what we lean on more. It's also stuff like just how cities are built and stuff, like how everything kind of orients itself around this type of person. Like all of the explosion of Uber and stuff like that is oriented around that kind of person, a lot of it, right? So I took a course a few years ago about like urban political economy and stuff like that. And one of the interesting things that we read was about like New York City and how some of the different reforms they've had where like they had like this, they have this park that's like an old rail line called the High Line. And it was like what they did is they took it and they cleaned it up and turned it into a tourist attraction. Basically, from the ground up tourist attraction. Like people had been wandering on this like elevated rail line kind of thing as like a fun thing to do kind of thing, and then they turned it explicitly into an attraction, and millions of people go there every year now over the last few years, whatever. And not just that, but the property values of everything around it have gone up like in aggregate by billions of dollars. They attribute just to having this amenity there, like just having this tourist attraction / nice thing to have there has an enormous positive effect on how much those buildings are worth around it, kind of thing. So it's interesting how developers are, if you look at like the writing for developers that they do and like all the whole project around that, it's just astonishing how much detail goes into it in terms of trying to sell to a certain type of upper class person kind of thing, and trying to like push a certain type of life to them, and how much like extreme detail goes into that in terms of like, you know, pushing certain types of amenities, certain types of people living there, certain types of neighborhoods and stuff. And you know, it gets talked a lot about in terms of gentrification and stuff, but it's interesting how deep that process is. Not just in it rolls back. It's not just buying housing and stuff like that, or renting or whatever. It's also like how culture works now in terms of production of art museums and stuff. Like art museums are built explicitly now a lot of the time for these kind of gentrification purposes and stuff, right? But it's also like you can really tell now how content on streaming services and stuff is built the same way, like in terms of trying to appeal to specific types of audiences, that their sensibilities and stuff in such a targeted way with, you know, such like extreme precision to try to get those kind of people to subscribe. I don't know, it's very, it ends up feeling like ominous once you kind of put it all together kind of thing. So
yeah, it's not great. The creepiest thing about that is the way that everything is targeted towards those people to kind of eliminate or make invisible any kind of underclass beneath them.
Sure.
So they just think of themselves as being like the average. And so when all this stuff comes out and like that's just the options you have is like to pay some high price for something, well, that's okay. I can afford that, and everyone else seems to be doing okay that I can see on my TV and in my neighborhood and at work. So it seems fine, right? Mm-hmm. And then even if they're like liberal, progressive or whatever, and they may have this idea of like, oh, you know, I want everyone to be taken care of and all that kind of stuff. If you never see the issues that result from these kind of solutions, you're just going to be happy with the solutions and push for them more, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that kind of creeps me out. Just the fact that it, I don't know, makes people invisible and stuff. It's sort of weird.
Sure. And I think that if you see some of the more mainstream solutions to poverty and stuff that people propose, it's stuff like Andrew Yang saying like $12,000 a year basic income or something, right? Like where, you know, that was his kind of thing, right? Like $1,000 a month or something like that, whatever. The Yang bucks kind of stuff. But that's a bit ominous to me. It's better than what exists now in a lot of senses, but like if that's the deal people are being offered, it's a very kind of terrifying deal. At the end of the day, it's like you get $12,000 and maybe access to all these kind of like streaming services and things, but you don't have any possibility of much beyond that kind of thing, right? Like you're not really, you know, it seems like a sort of paralysis thing. And I felt like that to some extent for a while. Recently it's gotten better, but like you do get the sense after a while that it's like there's just no plan for integrating you into the system kind of thing, right? Like it's just You're just on your own. You got to figure out some way how to do it. And all the sort of institutions that are there are really not, they're oriented towards people who are better off, not only like the culture and stuff, but also just like the pricing models and everything, like everything is oriented to people that are better off in a way that seems like upside down. Like, I mean, the obvious one is stuff like banking, where if you have a low income and you start getting dinged with fees here and there, you can really quickly get into a bad spot with that kind of stuff, right? Like just all of the dings you get, all the people getting rejection letters with all this kind of stuff. It all kind of really comes together quickly. But now I've got like some savings, and it's the opposite. Like I don't pay any bank fees anymore. Like they pay me to bank for them technically, I guess, right? Like, so it's crazy in some ways. It's like I understand why it has to work like that in the model that we have. Like I get that, but like it's funny how if you're well off in the society, you just don't even experience a lot of the costs directly, kind of thing, right? Because people are so interested in getting your business, so interested in having you part of their model, that it's like everything seems a little bit easier. So,
Yeah, you know what they say, it's expensive to be poor.
Yeah.
Yeah, the funny thing about that, right? Like if they only really cater to people with some disposable income, like a middle class kind of an income and up, the easiest way to do that is to get some sort of like nonsense job for one of these giant tech companies, it seems like, right? Yeah. Like it's like a pretty standard option for people.
Mm-hmm.
So you end up working for them. They're shoving these ideas down your throat all day at work. Then that becomes like kind of the dominant political paradigm. And, you have a nice contract. You're getting some good money, all that kind of stuff. For the people who don't have those options, like maybe they don't have access to that education or whatever it is, now everything's cash based, right? Like if we're going with this Yang style thing, you're getting your $1,000 a month or whatever. All this stuff that you need to pay for is just like in cash. There's not like it's not NHS or something like healthcare. It's just a service that's established and it's available to the public. Everything is for money.
Yeah.
I am kind of worried about like crime rates and stuff going sky high. If everything is just cash based and you're shutting out millions of people from like a decent kind of standard of living, you're really giving, and then there's no mobility, right? Like you're just stuck there. You're really encouraging people just to, pull off some heist or something to kind of break through. It seems kind of dangerous. I don't know. Maybe that's always kind of the case, and that's why we have so much crime anyways, but it kind of seems to be a really extreme version of this.
Yeah, I do think that at the very least, you could see a lot of social despair and stuff like that kind of thing. Like, people, like that's one of the problems with the basic income kind of stuff. People say about like transition jobs and stuff like that for green tech. And Matt Brunig made this point too, that it was like, if you're working at like some of these sort of like high-end skilled labor kind of things that in the oil industry and stuff, you can make in Canada like 6 figures sometimes. Or at least really like a...
I knew guys in Washington who would do that for a summer and come back with like 20 grand.
Yeah. To say that you're going to trade that in for retraining for a year and then you're getting a job after that that's paying $40,000, $50,000 a year or something like that, that might be as good as they can do, but it doesn't seem appealing at all to them. It's not like... It's like basically trying to get them to go straight or something like that, like trying to get them to... It's like saying trade a life of luxury for just a low scraping by existence or something like that kind of thing. So, I mean, it's not like that luxurious a life. I just mean that like no one's going to rush to make that deal, basically, kind of thing.
Yeah, so, that's a big downgrade for you as an individual.
So, and I mean, if you're talking about like a basic income of $12,000 a year or something, even if it were like $20,000 or something, it's like, if you've lost your job as a teacher or something like that, or whatever, like, if you're, and you are trying to raise a family and stuff, like you're not going to be able to do well kind of thing, like, well, you'll just be scraping by at the best. To frame it as that being like a positive alternative to the status quo instead of just a way of surviving the status quo seems like dangerous to me at some level. I don't know.
Yeah, that's really what it is. It's survival style economics. It reminds me of the famine in the Bengal in what was this, like the 1700s, late 1700s. There was a famine in the Bengal that was was administered by the British Empire, and there are documents showing where someone had calculated exactly how much money they needed to be like the workers in India, how much they need to be provided with in order to meet their calories to keep them alive. So like we talk about like a subsistence economy or whatever, like this is like literally they're calculating this for you and just doling out just a little bit.
Sure.
I'm sure there's some gaunt-faced bureaucrat that's doing similar things for us, maybe not to that extreme, right? But they're calculating exactly like, well, okay, how much can we squeeze out of these people who have basically nothing? And it makes it really easy if you know everyone has like a baseline of this much money and they have nothing else, then you can kind of figure it out. And, you know, different markets and stuff will be competing. There's the food and the water and the utilities and all that, you know, they're all going to try and squeeze as much as they can, but it'll eventually settle into this thing where it's just like you work and then you hand in everything you earn and you never accumulate anything and you're just stuck in that lower class.
Yeah, and I think debt is a big part of that too for average people, where they feel like going to be stuck in sort of a debt treadmill their whole lives or something, or like a lot of them get that sense at least. And you know, if you've got like a big student loan or something like that, you might feel like that, even if it's not like decisive, like even if it doesn't make you bankrupt, it could still feel like, you know, you're stuck in that rut for a long time or something. So yeah, and I mean, just thinking about when I've been in situations like that, you know, my mind goes to, okay, I bring home this much money, it's not enough. How do I make this, or how do I double up my paycheck? You know, the easiest option is selling drugs. You take that and you just flip it and it just magically multiplies, you know? Sure. It's like a little part-time thing. You get one paycheck and you turn it into two. And I can just see tons of people needing to resort to that, whether it's drugs, you know, opiates is already a problem. So that's kind of what really concerns me, is like if a lot of people have to resort to selling that, that's not good. And sex work and all this kind of stuff, you know, people are talking about like OnlyFans and there's all this kind of stuff. I don't know. It just seems pretty bleak. It does. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It feels like even if they like broke up the big tech companies or something like that, you know, like turn them into all different constituent parts, whatever, so that like say Prime Video was its own thing and not part of Prime and all that kind of stuff, you know? Amazon goes back to books. Just books. It seems like so many parts of this model are set up already to be kind of autonomous and running themselves kind of thing. That doesn't really matter who owns the actual company or how divided it is or what, you know, the management and stuff like that. That might affect certain things, but it's, you know, they're coordinated at like a different level of like just their imperatives of capital and stuff that just drive them towards certain conclusions that like, I don't even know if the sort of antitrust thing will actually make much of a difference at this point. I mean, in terms of like what's really probably going to happen over the next 5-10 years, you know, kind of thing. Like I could see like antitrust cases becoming a big deal, but it not really changing the general drift of things towards this model of sort of like a subscription life or whatever. So, yeah, you break up a crime family and you tell them they have to work separately. They're still basically working together, you know, even if they have to have different like clans or whatever that they're operating under. I don't know. That all kind of sucks, but maybe that's what it is. And it's just nice to know that money isn't everything in life, and I won't ever have any, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah, I don't know. It does feel like a strange kind of thing. It's funny because when I think about it for any length of time, I start to have an impulse of, okay, how am I going to decouple myself from this system in different ways or whatever, you know, like, and it just ends up being kind of like, well, it's too irritating for it to matter at like an individual level. Like I can maybe do a few things here and there, but even then, like everything is so set up on like a certain path that it's more just something you can kind of gripe about and then maybe build into your political alternatives or something down the line, or something, maybe something that works a bit differently or something. So yeah, I mean, at the very least, I don't feel like cheerleading for it or working for part of that, you know, apparatus or something. I think I'd feel bad about that, but I don't know. I was thinking of like a related thing of, you know, you can't repair stuff kind of stuff of the Internet of Things. You know, there's that Internet of Shit thing or something like that on the, I think like the account, where what they do is they basically just track all of the things that now have firmware and stuff, and it's
right.
like
Yeah.
a toaster and all that, and all these
Yeah.
different things that break down, or like their subscription services that the company goes bankrupt, and then you just don't have like it's pinging to nothing kind of thing, like there's so many things now with like the smart home and all that where it's designed to catch a net around everything that you consume, everything that you experience. I don't know. It's just a strange thing. It just seems like a bit. The whole thing, as I said, any individual thing is just a bit weird and like has to be like convinced to me. You know what I mean? Like has to be explained, and then I'm like, okay, well maybe I can see the point of that. But then when it's all together at one thing, where you're like, okay, well, I have to, attach my toaster to Wi-Fi and all that kind of stuff, then you're like, whoa, this is a bit weird, kind of thing. I don't know. So
Yeah. It almost kind of seems like it's possibly a move of desperation on their part. Like they know they can sell you stuff, but it's not enough. So they need to make sure that they as a company can exist in the future. So they're making these moves where it's like, well, you need us to exist because otherwise your toaster can't tell you what the weather is like or whatever. Yeah. So it kind of keeps them around, I guess. It's sort of like a lifeline for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I don't know. As much as I don't like to see those people like getting fat and rich and stuff, seeing them make things that smell a little desperate is almost scarier because it's like, wait, hold on, you guys are, what's the desperation about?
Sure.
Can you just go back to your regular blood sucking instead of like red alert level blood sucking?
Yeah, and we had Leo on before talking about this kind of stuff with clothes, where it's like you have basically everything is made in the cheapest way possible now. It's designed to be thrown out quickly. And it does feel like that is a large part of the whole culture now, where it's like it's not only that you don't own content in a lot of ways, it's also that anything that you do own is designed to be sort of faddish and short-lived and, integrated into this. It's not like you have like showpiece or valuable clothes anymore. A lot of it is just basically like athleisure kind of stuff, or like just basically getting by kind of cheap stuff that you can. And again, it's one of those things where that doesn't really bother me as much individually, but I can see how it's not good for the overall cultural kind of like ecosystem kind of thing. I can see how it all comes together pretty quickly to create this sort of nightmare, especially in terms of like throwaway culture and stuff, where it encourages a certain type of non-sustainability kind of thing. So
yeah, it is interesting to see how discontent about this stuff is rising up, because like I think what you're describing is true for many people. Like they don't have strong negative reactions to any one particular thing, so they're kind of just like, oh well that's a little annoying, or they don't care about it at all and they just go along with it. But some like subcultures or communities, like it really affects them in a negative way and they kind of have like this allergic reaction against it, but it's really focused on that one kind of like consumer aspect, so like I know that right to repair is like a big deal for PC and like DIY enthusiast type people. Like they talk about this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't really know exactly what that is, but I know that there's a big difference between like the Apple style, where you buy an Apple computer and you basically can't open it up and tinker with it or upgrade it or anything. You have to give it back to them to service it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And if you build your own computer, you are basically like now paying for the privilege of doing that. Now that this stuff is getting so expensive, it's essentially like this tax on your stuff to be able to actually use it yourself.
Sure.
And people in that community get upset about that particular issue, but they may not have any care at all about all of the other ways that this sort of logic is playing out. So it only seems like, oh well, the gamers are getting cranky, you have like clothes people or whatever, like Leo is describing that whole situation. They may just be getting upset about clothing, and it again, it's just kind of like centered in this consumerist kind of way. And I don't think that builds any sort of political solidarity at all, because a lot of these different groups are not going to see eye to eye, even if they have the same kind of complaints about their particular subculture. It's not going to be connected to like a broader critique, and then I don't think that snowballs or leads to anywhere,
Yeah, and I think that the related thing with that is that you see conspiracy theories. explicitly related to consumer issues that they might not make sense too much themselves, but you can kind of see what they're getting at for things. Like you mentioned kind of the gaming stuff a bit. I think that's part of it, that like, there obviously is that sort of controversy around that kind of stuff a lot of the time. But, it's related things too, where like, I think like the fear of like vaccines, the ones before COVID kind of stuff, like for measles and all that kind of stuff, whatever, like you had these like consumer movements kind of that you wouldn't think of them in that way, but they are, that are like, mothers against vaccines, or like,
yeah, that's an interesting way to think of it.
They're all different like ways of people that have some sort of feeling of unease with an industry, explaining it in different ways and stuff. Like, so, they know that, like, say the food industry has a lot of food that is just not healthy at all that's being sold. So they react in a different way by, like, say, coding their food in different ways to be healthy in their minds, like, organic and vegetarian and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then they have like a continuum of that with other parts of their life about like trying to avoid toxins and all that kind of stuff. So they might be environmentalists and stuff. And then they're also worried about, the vaccines or allergies and all these different things, like where it adds up as a whole subculture, but all we end up focusing on is the irrational elements of it being a source of like ridicule kind of thing, instead of that overall kind of consumer worrisome, kind of fear of what's going on in society and stuff.
Yeah. So, the complainers are confused, and then the critics of the complainers are also confused. Like, they're not really getting at what the powers that be or whatever can kind of get away with this plan, because people are debating about very surface level things that are antagonistic between those two groups, but it's not really antagonistic with the logic of the economic plan that's being rolled out.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that you can kind of look at a lot of controversy that arises. Like, remember when Cuties came out and people were like boycott Netflix and kind of upset at Netflix and all this sort of stuff?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of a similar thing where, content that is, as we were describing, it's really geared towards a certain kind of market and demographic, and it gets rolled out onto the service that's available to everybody, but it's really kind of specifically targeted in terms of like, who are we really trying to get on board here? Like, who do we care about that we kind of keep their subscriptions? And Cuties, I'm not going to say is like something that everybody necessarily was like dying for, but it certainly is something that turns off a lot of people. You know what I mean? Like that, they're just going to have an immediate negative reaction to that. And so when people complain about that and start saying things like, oh, Netflix is trying to turn us all into pedophiles or something, that's pretty strange, right? Like, most people are going to hear that and think that's bizarre. But if you just kind of counter that argument and don't think about like why are people feeling this strongly about this like weird movie or whatever, you're just going to end up in this like pointless culture war argument, instead of, and then Netflix kind of gets away with all this, whatever they're trying to do with the services and stuff. So
like people are feeling unease about like this curation aspect that Netflix has,
right?
And they don't know how to put that into words really. So a clear-cut example comes up to them in their minds of why something is wrong here. So then they focus on that. Instead of worrying about what that means in broader terms, we end up just kind of making fun of them for thinking that it was a deliberate plot or something like that. So, yeah.
Right. Another thing I kind of have been thinking about, which I don't have very clear ideas about, but it's just something that maybe the listeners, maybe it'll just kind of get them thinking if they have other ideas about this, but just how this is affecting other countries outside of North America. Because I think we tend to think about how this affects us. I think a lot of this like economic logic has been baked into a lot of developing countries, like countries that have experienced like World Bank assistance and UN assistance and stuff for development over the past, like, say 10, 20 years, maybe even. I think a lot of this idea of you don't own stuff, you just rent it, is already kind of there. One example that came to mind, it's not a direct connection really, but I think you can kind of see what I'm getting at, is I think this was last year. Well, no, I guess it would be the year before. Lebanon had these big protests about a WhatsApp tax, which sounds completely alien to me, right? Like I can't see that happening here in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But it made sense in Lebanon, right? Because they had these very high fees on their phones and utilities and stuff like that. So people were using WhatsApp to kind of get around that. And so the government saw that as a huge loss of revenue that they were expecting. And so they imposed a tax on WhatsApp, and it created these huge protests.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember in Palestine, the way people would pay for their utilities was like pay as you go, basically, for everything.
Yeah.
So you would just go to a meter and put in some money, and you could put in like $1, you could really like pay very little for this. Then you'd get a certain amount of gas, you get a certain amount of electricity or whatever, and then when it would run out, you have to go fill up the meter again.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, there was no sense of like, I pay this monthly as a bill. It was just like, well, you pay it until you run out of money, and then you find more money and you come back for it.
Sure.
And, again, that's not like some kind of dramatic, radical difference, really, but it just sort of seems to like anticipate some of these things coming to be like the norm for everything,
Yeah.
And I just wonder how this is going to play out, because this whole Great Reset thing is supposed to be like a global plan. There's people leaders from all over the world coming together to figure this out together. And I think in different countries, they're going to have a different sense of like what needs to change and what's already working for this. And it'll be interesting to see like if some of these countries that are developing already along this line, if they're going to get there faster, if there's going to be more pushback, who knows? It could play out a lot of different ways. So it'll be interesting for sure.
Yeah, it reminds me of what's happened in South Africa under Mandela, like all these new liberal programs, like in terms of like power meters and all this kind of stuff. One of the things that they did is set it up so that, well, basically the idea for under Mandela was that he tried to push a lot of like special social democratic programs to just address some of the black poverty and all that kind of stuff right away. But at the same time, he got hit by so many different structural adjustment program kind of stuff that it was like for every one good thing he did, he had to do 2 bad things or 3 bad things kind of thing, And one of the things that they did was privatize the power system, power production, and move towards a metered system and make it so that individuals had pay accounts for their power and then cut them off and all that kind of stuff, like if they didn't pay, and in a way that didn't really make sense, especially for the thing. And it turned into this huge problem where the power went up, prices went up and all this kind of stuff. And people had these accounts that they just weren't paying, so their power would go off and then they'd have to pay, in the same way I think that you suggested, like in terms of being metered in a special way and all that kind of stuff. And the response to it that the people in villages and stuff would do is just wire things illegally, right? So
sure,
they would basically cut out the power boxes, or they would, move things around basically different ways so that like one power thing was powering a bunch of different things in very dangerous ways often, right? Like, had all these, that's very common to see, I guess, in the developing world, is all these wires everywhere. It's interesting that what happened was it ended up being for a long time this kind of tit for tat kind of thing where you would have these power workers like from the companies going around just constantly trying to fix these problems and then collecting money and stuff from people in their defaulting accounts and all this kind of stuff. And the overall effect on the system was basically like, it was like the whole power system was arranged around these payments and stuff that didn't even make like much rational economic sense at the end of the day. Like if it had been set up in a better way so that like it was just, guaranteed to certain people and that kind of stuff, it probably would have avoided a lot of these compounding social problems and economic problems related to it and stuff. So it was kind of like an absurd dance kind of thing. And what ended up happening in response is they won a sort of reform measure where basically the first amount for each person, the small amount, was free, I think. And then sort of like a staggered rate on top of that or whatever. So they actually won a victory on that kind of thing because of how absurd the result was. I feel like the government wants to, in a lot of places, wants to move more and more towards that kind of model of, pay for basically anything, resource use wise, to the hilt kind of thing, right? You see that with like tuition for schools or carbon taxes and all this kind of stuff. And then from there, you kind of move into a weird zone kind of thing where it's like, the resulting weird system of tithes on everyone and stuff is probably less efficient than just having things being public and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know. We will see how things play out, but those are a lot of kind of ominous signs, I think, that the direction we're going in. So yeah, when you hear about the Great Reset or whatever, and the whole conspiracy angle to it, I think that there's some legitimacy to the anxieties that people have. Not necessarily any specific narrative. There's always a lot of wacky narratives around exactly what is going on there, but the idea that something bad is happening seems right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to questions here. Okay, how about this one, Don? Do you think Ukrainians are the real Herrenvolk?
Yeah, I'm not really sure what that means. I think it's like a certain type of like the people of the nation, whatever, I guess. Like
yeah, I don't really know exactly what that means. I looked it up and it says the German nation as considered by the Nazis to be innately superior to others. I guess Herr is like sir, right? Like okay. Herr whatever is like Mr. whatever. So I guess it's kind of like master race kind of a thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's actually literally what it means, master race.
Okay. Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think that
me neither.
Yeah. I don't know. I do feel like it's sad that that a lot of that culture got completely wiped out, like Central European culture in World War II kind of thing. Just got like nuked basically. But like I don't know. I like the idea sometimes of thinking of like what would have happened if like after World War I things just kind of plugged along for a while, instead of just the borders and everything getting ripped apart again and again. But I don't know. It's sad, but yeah. That's why I also believe that like it would be fun if like there was like a super state, some like just be everything between Germany and Russia was like one country basically,
and, like the Poland, Lithuania, the old Union
exactly,
state.
But like including the Southern Slavs and like Nordic countries maybe, just like a giant super state which is like more powerful population wise at least than Russia and Germany and all that. Yeah, it'd be fun.
Yeah, it would be fun. Yeah. One thing we should get to in the future is looking into like the really far right wing Ukrainian cultural groups and stuff.
Yeah.
Because I know that they are really core to like the whole international fascist network, like the whole Gladio thing. They're really a core part of that in North America, and I think it would be kind of interesting to dig into that, sure. Especially since you may have some, I don't know, just some kind of idea about that a little bit. Because even in Canada in particular, it's supposed to be kind of like headquartered there. So
yeah, Canada is huge. I think that like people from Eastern Europe in general, and including Russia, like I think there's probably 1 million, 2 million Canadians that have that heritage in different ways. And I think it's like 700,000 for Ukraine and some, or something like that. It's huge. It's a huge number of people that come from that kind of thing. And yeah, very explicitly modeled on the Zionist movement too, a lot of it.
Right.
As like splitting the left and turning a lot of the movements into nationalist movements. And in Canada, a lot of that work is done by liberals too, which is kind of funny, or like reformist left kind of people too. So that like there's very big wings of the Liberal Party and stuff that are like lobbyists for Ukraine and stuff. Our deputy prime minister is actually, that's like the most famous case. She like owns a condo in Kiev, I think, and stuff, and like is like a Ukrainian nationalist kind of person. So yeah, it's one of those things where it reminds me of like Latin America in that way, where you'll have a lot of people in sort of liberal circles in the United States that might consider themselves quite progressive in the United States, but then the second they start talking about their home countries and stuff,
Yeah.
they start getting into like, well, the death squads are just militias of people's defense or something, like
Right.
stuff like that. So, I mean, the difference is that I think that most of the people in Ukraine now, especially, are not really like on the other side, sort of quote unquote, not really that much different in a lot of ways. Sometimes they might brand themselves as being communists and stuff, but like, I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like a bad situation. It's like how Haiti was for years or something like that, like where it's like just a lot of like bad people on all sides kind of thing or something, it's not like people try to easily cheer one side or the other. I don't know. I feel like that is happening right now with like Navalny or whatever in Russia, where a lot of people are pointing out that he's like far right and that, and it's like, yeah, but that's like it's Russian politics. It's like far right people pointing at far right people all the time. That's all it is, kind of thing. So
yeah, that's always a good like working assumption. Just assume everyone's a bad actor until they prove themselves otherwise.
Sure. Yeah, like, I mean, imagine like the Communist Party of the Russian Federation or whatever, like having a meeting about like woke stuff or something like that in DSA meeting or whatever, like having like a joint meeting or something, and they're like talking about how like the family is the root of the nation or something, or like, I don't know, like a lot of left-wing parties in a lot of the world have pretty like red-brown kind of views. I don't know, they're like they have like a lot of views that would be considered far right in Western countries, basically, I would say. So
yeah, it's really interesting how neatly you can cover all that stuff up under the umbrella of just like cultural tolerance. Like if you're coming from like this liberal ideology and you want to engage with like a far right cultural nationalist, well, you can kind of just hand wave all the problematic stuff around that and just say like, oh, well, this is their culture and we should respect that and preserve that. And so I guess they do have to, have these people's militias that cleanse the villages and stuff.
Yeah, or like we don't support them directly. It's that we we want to leave it up to them.
Yeah.
And they just happen to be the people that have these far right views or whatever. So I don't know. I think that like my automatic argument gene or something that makes me want to argue with people like that a lot of the time, I'm pretty good at suppressing it, but it's hard. Because, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff now where I just have to let it flow over me instead of getting into arguments because it's not worth it. But yeah.
Right. That's their culture. You have to tolerate
Exactly.
it. Yeah. All right. Let's move on to the next question. I think this one is directed at me. It says, what is your opinion of Oman? On that whole subject, what do you think of Ibadi Islam? Is it okay? I don't have any real opinions about Oman, except that it's kind of like an interesting place historically. The whole Indian Ocean trade network is something that I don't think gets enough attention, generally speaking, in terms of how dynamic and just interesting of a place it was. Mm-hmm. The whole the trade from Yemen to India, it's very easy to navigate those waters. So that has been going on for a very long time. And so you have places like Oman that have as much Indian interaction and influence, much more so than, say, they would with like countries on the Palestinian coast, Mm-hmm. So that's just like an interesting like historical setting. In terms of Ibadi Islam, again, it's very interesting. The origins of it derive from the Khawarij sect, which were kind of like the very earliest sect of like takfiri jihadist type people who consider like all other Muslims sinners, and because they were sinning, that put them out of Islam. This was their theology. This isn't standard theology. So they sinned. That means that they are apostates. That means that we can kill them and rob them, and their property rightfully belongs to us. That kind of stuff. So that's where Ibadi Islam originates. It's not like that at all anymore. Like it's not some extremist like sect like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of like mellowed over time, and I think that the basic theological foundations of it it's still there. Like they still have these beliefs, but they're much more tolerant and kind of like Sunnified. Like they pray with Sunnis and stuff commonly, and so I don't know. I have no issue with them as they have no issue with me, really. So
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really don't like to divide up Islam into these different sects and stuff. Like even like Sunni Shia, I think people can put way too much emphasis on that when if you just take your average Sunni and your average Shia who don't have like overinvestment in sectarian politics, they're not going to have a lot of difference. Like they may technically pray differently, and there may be certain holidays that are emphasized more in one or the other, but it's not like they're going to see each other as like sworn enemies or even like necessarily of being of a different kind of religious thing or whatever, you know, like that's not necessarily the case. And that's kind of how I see it. Like if someone's claiming Shia, I don't assume that they have like problematic beliefs that even like that I couldn't claim them to be as like a brother or sister, you know what I mean? Like that stuff is just really silly.
Mm-hmm. Were you ever in Oman?
No.
Okay.
No, I've never been to that part of the peninsula.
Okay.
So let's move on to the next question here. What's cuter, real animals or cartoon animals? Real
animals. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Real animals. Cartoon animals are funny.
Yeah.
But I don't... Cartoons in general I don't find, like, cute isn't the kind of impression I get from them. It's more just, like, they're funny or it's just a way of animating something, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've been into retweeting animal pictures lately. I don't know.
Cool.
People's dogs and stuff. I like that.
Yeah, it's funny how that's such like a normie thing, but it also you go round deep enough, it's kind of like the horseshoe effect. You come back to it.
Yeah.
You get so online, you just kind of come back to like I like cat pictures and
sure
and like dog videos and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All right. How do you decorate and furnish your living space? Well, I know you have some interesting decorations.
Yeah, I've got like a paper cut thing of the 5 heads of Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao that I keep above my desk. And I think it says in Chinese something like, Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought is good or something like that. I don't know. And I bought it from this guy that what he does is he had like tiny scissors and he cut out from a single piece of paper all of the, like everything, like all the characters, all the little divots in the people's faces and stuff with these tiny scissors. And it's like a little craft thing. And I bought it for like, $4 or something, I think. So yeah. And I don't know. That's about it really. I've got my master's diploma up too. I don't know. And then I need to, I feel like eventually I want to buy some like, art or something. I don't know, like posters or something. I don't know. Nice framed things. But other than that, I don't have like a place right now really that I feel like is like mine. So, in the future when I do, that'll be nice. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm still of that mindset, even though I've lived in this place now for like 5-6 years. I still have this like sense of like no point in getting settled here and putting stuff up. So my walls are fairly bare. I do have some framed photographs that either I or Tabs have taken, and we kind of keep those up. So I've got a picture of the two of us on my dresser. There's a picture of her when she was younger. We got some pictures of like mountains and forests and stuff that we visited. Yeah, but like they actually have a few framed art things just sitting on the floor that I haven't put up because I've moved around so much that I have never really had a place that I was just like, okay, this is where I'm at now. I should decorate it. So I just have never really decorated properly before. So I don't even know what to do with it. Yeah. So I'm very slowly kind of like cleaning things up and stuff. Like I'm going about it in a very like utilitarian kind of way. So like the first thing I'm doing right now is like I'm kind of improving my desk situation. So I'm getting like routing my cables and wires and stuff so that's neat. I'm getting a boom arm for the mic. I'm getting a headphone mount for my headphones and stuff so that can kind of get out of the way because all this stuff just sort of sits on my desk otherwise. Sure. So like once that's cleaned up, then I'll be like, okay, well now I kind of want a little bit more lighting up there. I want a picture on the wall over there, that kind of thing. We got something the other day in the mail, which is like a little nightlight that we wanted in the bathroom, and it's like 3 little mushrooms, and it's got the same kind of RGB lighting that you would have in like a computer, you know.
Oh yeah.
So I was kind of laughing about the fact that like even our nightlight has like that stupid gamer lighting.
Yeah. I guess I've got like pictures of my niece and nephew and stuff like that, and like family and stuff, and I don't know, little things like that. A lot of books. That's I don't know. I tried to make it into like a work desk kind of thing, so I've got like, you know, all of my like envelopes and cards and pens and, you know, all the stuff arranged so that it looks like I might theoretically do work one day. But I don't know. I don't know. I kind of like it it is right now. But yeah, it doesn't feel like, it feels like just a place I'm staying for now kind of thing. So, and I moved like, probably in the last 20 years, I've moved once every like 2 years probably in, you know, in general kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know, or more maybe. So yeah, so like, yeah, I'm kind of hoping to save up and maybe like commit to a place for a while kind of thing. So we'll see.
Yeah. Right now we're rocking the transient minimalist aesthetic.
Yeah. Sure.
All right. Next question here says, how can the Bible explain friggin' dinosaurs, man? It can't.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like joking about this with like dinosaur theory and stuff, and like pretending that I don't believe in it and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I don't understand what I guess the idea is that like it's just no necessary. It's like don't multiply entities or something like that. It's like Occam's razor kind of thing. It's like, okay, well, if you can explain why certain things are there, and you can't explain why certain things aren't there, or something like that, you know, like, then therefore there's no reason to lean on a supernatural explanation or something like that. Like, I think that's the, you know, that's like the upshot of it. And I don't know, it feels like that's not true if it just happens to be the case that things were set up that way or whatever, you know, like it's just it's like for creation or something like that, right? It's just like if God wanted them a certain way and they happen to evolve that way or something like that, it's not like a percentage thing. It's not like okay, there's a 5% chance things were created or something like that. It's either it happened or it didn't, right? There's no probability involved. So doesn't really make logical sense in a certain sense, but yeah.
Yeah. I think I've talked about this before, but my favorite like fan kind of fiction about dinosaurs as it pertains to Islam is that there is some lore about jinns, which is that the way that Iblis, like Satan, became the head, like the chief jinn, is that he prosecuted a war and won a war that kind of like conquered all of the jinn and like became like their leader.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he was in the court of angels, you know, with God. And then when he was presented Adam, he refused to bow. This is all in the Quran, right? So this is kind of like the reason that Satan hates us and is trying to get us like to do bad things and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So he used to be a good guy and conquered all the jinn. And I like to kind of like theorize that the dinosaurs was actually like they were the vehicles through which these wars were fought. So like jinn like possessed the dinosaurs and like fought it out in like this kind of like mech warrior kind of thing with dinosaurs.
That's cool.
Yeah, that would be cool. Like, what if that actually is what happened? Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing with dinosaurs and stuff is we don't know as much about dinosaurs as kind of is presumed. Like when you have this sort of argument with religious folk who have this kind of idea about dinosaurs, I think people kind of just are really easy to kind of presume that we just know everything about dinosaurs and it's very established and stuff. There's a lot of like guesswork and patchiness in there. So while the typical arguments that you hear from like dinosaur deniers or whatever on the religious side are not very good, and clearly like they're really trying to maintain a very simple narrative that is just like it's in our scripture and that explains everything and you don't need to think about it, like don't complicate things. I think the other people who are kind of criticizing this tend to kind of say like, well, you need to accept the science. Blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of gray area there, I think, where you can have a kind of like a literal a literalist kind of reading of your scripture and still accommodate the fact of like dinosaurs and stuff. I think that's possible.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if you even just take one step away from it being all literal all the way down, then it's like, okay, well, then who cares? It's like you're trying to, it's like when people try to argue with the dumbest people they can find kind of thing instead of, actually work through the ideas, whatever. But anyways, I guess it doesn't.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't really matter at the end of the day, I don't think, for that kind of stuff, like actually winning those arguments or something. But yeah. I don't know.
Right.
Sure.
Okay. Tom, as a Muslim, do you think that sloths, the South American jungle, in quotes, animals, are actually a form of jinn? And what about you, Don? Do you think those creatures are actually physical manifestations of sin? I have never thought about that, but that's an interesting idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're named sloths because they are sloth. That's interesting. Yeah, I wonder. Yeah, that seems like a good thing that we could work with. Like, as like maybe you could, like, I don't know, study them and slowly and kind of thing, and then learn from them, and then I could become not a sloth anymore from that.
We
or something.
could develop like a vaccine based on their DNA.
yeah, and then I could get a lot of energy and be able to do stuff or whatever. So that'd be fun.
Yeah, or maybe we end up inadvertently developing some kind of like cult that like ritually sacrifices these animals to like get rid of the lazy bug or whatever in people, sure. And they have to like kill a sloth on a big Aztec temple or something.
Yeah, I don't think either of our religions are big into that though, right? Like,
no, but these things spiral out of control pretty quick. So, yeah, there are some beliefs in the Muslim world around certain animals being jinn. Like black dogs is a very common one in South Asia and to some extent the Arab world as well. Mm-hmm. But that, I don't know. I don't get how that works. To me, like, it's very clear that jinn are like unseen things. They kind of exist in like this psychic kind of dimension. It makes a lot more sense to think of them that way, as like, in the way that we think of like mental illnesses kind of having some sort of being, in the sense that they're like a coherent single object or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Yeah. All right. This question, I'm not a fan of this question, but I appreciate that it's being asked here. It says, is modernity a form of decadence? So let me explain why I don't like this. It's two very vague terms, and I'm being asked if one term is the same as the other term. Now, you can define modernity a lot of different ways, and I don't know what's necessarily intended here. And decadence is also like a very broad idea that could really mean a lot of things. So I'm being asked if one thing, which could be many different things, is the same as another thing, which could also be many different things. So I find it difficult to answer that. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like most periods of history have had decadence in them. I don't know. Like, not really. Like, if I think of like societies propped up by slaves and stuff or whatever. Or like, giant feudal riches and all that. Or colonial
I really
systems.
don't know exactly what decadence is supposed to be. Is it just that there are rich people living like grotesquely luxurious lives or something? Like, I don't know what to contrast that with.
Yep, I think that's about it. Or unless it's supposed to be in that like it becomes grotesque to such a degree that it becomes the ideology of the world or something. So that it's not just the fact that it has instances of richness kind of thing, or that it has become corrupt, but also that they view society through that lens and that it's like a corruption. I don't know. I could kind of see that, but it seems like a stretch.
Yeah. Yeah, this really seems to kind of be part of like you have an ideology and you have certain things you love and certain things you hate within that ideology, and you apply these terms to it, and they can kind of, anything can fit there as you need them to. So modernity is like anything that exists today, and decadence is the bad aspect of it that used to be better, and we can return to that. So that seems kind of primed for to be an instrument of ideology.
Yeah. It also sounds more like a question for like an explicitly post-left podcast or something kind of thing,
Yeah,
when they
for
get
sure.
when they get deep into that kind of stuff. I don't know. I'm not really...
there's one of those guys that loves talking about decadence. I'm never really sure what he's on about, but
okay.
Yeah. This one's in all caps, and it says, all caps mode is the most powerful mode on the internet. Use carefully and all your enemies shall be vanquished. But if you do not know how to use it, you will be consumed by its power.
I don't know.
I think he's right. Remember that guy all caps, bro?
Yeah. Yeah, he was powerful.
He was powerful, and he was just whiny about everything, but
Sure.
because it was in all caps, it felt impressive.
At the same time, I think there was like film critic Hulk or something.
Right.
And he did it, and it was not good, I don't think. So, I don't know.
No, because you diluted it with the gimmick account.
Sure.
Which is gimmick accounts are a very front-loaded kind of mode. You get the immediate like, oh, haha, that's a funny concept. And then as soon as that wears off, it sucks. So you do that with all caps and you're just stretching out the suck.
There's one difference that I've heard that I know of that is Unreal Tournament Warrior, who posts about Unreal Tournament and posts in all caps. So I think he or she is quite powerful. So yes.
That's a fair point. I would say that the all caps is not it's not your standard all caps mode.
Sure.
But instead it is part of the gimmick that it still works. So some of these gimmicks do have a little bit of longevity, and I think this is a case where the all caps is really just kind of triggering that Unreal Tournament guy voice in your head.
Yeah.
And so it's not technically all caps mode, although you do get some of the benefits of all caps mode by doing it that way. So
sure.
It's an excellent deployment of the gimmick account there.
Mm-hmm. One of the few that holds up over time.
Yeah. How do I get my white dad to stop using AAVE in text messages without hurting his feelings?
I don't know why you would want him to stop. I don't know. You should be encouraging it. You should be pushing his limits. Try to see what you can get him to say. So.
Yeah, he's just exploring, this new world we live in in Biden's America,
Sure. Yeah, so I guess that does it for this week, folks. If you enjoyed this episode and would like a second episode every week, please sign up for our Patreon at the normal tier, which will get you access to the Discord as well, where we chat, and also there are topic suggestions and Discord questions for the bonus episodes. And I'm not sure what else. What else is there?
Yeah, that's about it. You get your second episode and you get your Discord. And, yeah. I guess that's it. We'll see you next week.
Yep. See you guys. Bye.